Hey, I'm Brian Stelter, and it's time for Reliable Sources, our weekly look at the story behind the story, of how the media really works, how the news gets made. This hour, 60-plus advertisers dropping Bill O'Reilly. This week, that all came after the settlements, news of the settlements over sexual harassment allegations. Meanwhile, a federal investigation of Fox continues, leaving a lot of unanswered questions about O'Reilly and Fox's future. President Trump, however, says he doesn't think O'Reilly did anything wrong, defending his old friend. We'll have more on that coming up. But first, the power of pictures. This week we saw the impact of gruesome imagery when it came to the situation in Syria. Administration officials say President Trump was moved to action by horrific images like these of Syrian civilians, victims of a chemical weapons attack that left more than 100 people dead. Two questions about this. One, isn't this exactly the sort of test of White House credibility that we all saw coming for months? There have been so many cases of misleading or false statements from Trump and his aides. So now, when life and death is on the line, do people believe the White House assertions? 2 weeks ago on this program, Carl Bernstein said it's almost an impossibility that Trump can regain trust. So that's one question as we consider the credibility of the administration's statements. Number two, what's the impact on the images? What's the impact of the images on all of us as viewers? And what do we not show as newsrooms? As Paul Waldman of the Washington Post wrote on Friday, it's not as though Trump just found out that children are dying in Syria. We get to see those horrifying images of chemical weapons attacks precisely because they are less gruesome than what happens when someone is killed by conventional weapons. If a photojournalist takes a photo of a dead child whose limbs have been blown off by a bomb, you won't ever see it, and neither will Trump. The newspaper won't run it, and the evening news won't show it, because editors consider those images too upsetting. But you will see a photo of a child killed by sarin gas, because her body is intact. How do those sorts of editorial decisions affect your perceptions and my perceptions and the president's perceptions? Because this does seem to be a red line for the news media, what newsrooms will and won't show. Now, how do those decisions affect viewers, including the most powerful cable news viewer of all, the President of the United States? Joining me now, discussing more on all of this, Lara Stravakian, co-founder and CEO of Syria Deeply. Yeah, I'm sorry, I think I messed up your name. Say it again for me.
That's all right, I'll fix it. Lara Satrakian.
Thank you. I apologize. I haven't seen you in many years. You're the co-founder of Syria Deeply, a site providing in-depth coverage of the ongoing war in Syria. And Jeremy Scahill, co-founder of The Intercept and host of the podcast Intercepted. Thank you both for being here. Lara, you've been running Syria Deeply for years, trying to provide the kind of thorough coverage of this war that people may not find elsewhere. What was your reaction about the airstrike on Thursday?
Truth be told, it was very surprising, if only because we've seen 6 years of the Syrian conflict with so many heartbreaking images and so many that did bust through and become global memes, from the death of Aylan Kurdi, that young boy who washed up on the shore in Turkey in 2015, to the chemical weapons attack in August 2013, which sparked this whole debate over whether to strike. So there was nothing particularly different about this week in Syria, except for the fact that in Washington there was the political will to strike. So I think that was very surprising for anyone who's been watching Syria's war and covering it closely.
Does this mean that newsrooms should be showing more of the awful imagery that comes out of Syria every week? There's these media activists that risk their lives to get images and videos out of Syria on a daily basis. We oftentimes don't see those images because they're so gory, so graphic.
Absolutely. And you have American journalists who've risked their lives and some who've lost their lives just to cover this war continuously. Anthony Shadid of the New York Times died covering Syria. James Foley, the freelance journalist who was beheaded by ISIS, died trying to capture not just images but perspectives. And what we do need to see in the media is continuous coverage of Syria. What we get right now is a complete vacuum, which is no coverage until there's a momentary obsession, whether it's chemical weapons or Aylan Kurdi or something that we think speaks to an American news appetite. But a lot gets lost along the way. So our ability to digest that information and to make sense of that picture is completely gone, largely because as a whole, and I don't like to generalize except that it's true this time, as a whole, our industry has failed coverage of the Syrian crisis. We have not provided consistent and focused coverage. The first years of the crisis, even the Pew Center says there was modest to negligible coverage of Syria. It was the Arab Spring story that fell off the radar and fell off the news desk. And all of us have suffered for that. And the number one way we've suffered is an inability to make sense of those images, as I said, but then also to have a coherent policy conversation about what needs to be done. And frankly, also a failure, I believe, among many, many news outlets to exercise any critical thinking when these images do come out. First of all, as you said, they are handed out by media activists. These are not our own images. When it comes to this week's attack, there's still no evidence from the OPCW, which is the main UN-linked monitoring body, that this chemical attack took place, that it was the responsibility of the Assad government. I mean, the facts are not all in. There have been other chemical attacks that the OPCW documented and said this was a case of chlorine gas or mustard gas, and they went largely unreported in the press. So we are taking this, essentially, this activist footage at face value. We are going along with an assumption of facts that are not yet verified, and then we're not really questioning the fallout of this attack and whether it succeeds in any sort of coherent policy objective. So I know there are fantastic journalists covering this story, a lot of them on CNN, but by and large, we are failing to make sense of the Syrian story.
Arwa Damon, one of our correspondents who has risked her life going into Syria over these past 6 years, said to me a couple days ago that she's racked with guilt, wondering if she could have or should have possibly done even more. Jeremy, I think there is awareness of what's been going on in Syria, but for some reason, maybe people are desensitized. What is your view of the coverage?
Well, first of all, let's look at this in the big picture. Donald Trump has given greater latitude to the military to conduct strikes with almost no regard for civilians. Just in the month of March, Brian, U.S. and allied forces have killed more than 1,000 civilians in Iraq and Syria, according to the nonpartisan independent group Air Wars. Trump is funneling weapons and intelligence to the Saudis that are being used to utterly destroy Yemen at this point. The United States has been engaged militarily in Syria for several years now, both in the form of special operations forces and increasingly conventional boots on the ground, but also just scorched earth bombing, particularly since Trump took office. And I have to say, Brian, that Arwa Damon is a fantastic reporter. I have great respect for her. But I think when we talk about this, CNN needs to immediately withdraw all retired generals and colonels from its airwaves. You know, Fareed Zakaria, if that guy could have sex with this cruise missile attack, I think he would do it. Brian Williams seemed to just be in true love with the cruise missile strike and in a despicable way invoking Leonard Cohen's name. I mean, the media coverage has been atrocious, particularly, and this is across the board on every network, particularly when the strike is happening. It's like they're in awe of the cruise missiles. And look no further than Hillary Clinton, Bill Kristol, and Donald Trump once again being on the same team when it comes to these kinds of wars. The elite of both parties just all get in line, and they absolutely love a cruise missile strike.
You've teed up my essay that's coming up later in the hour. You know, with regards to Fareed, I was just talking to him about this as the show is wrapping up. He thinks, you know, people didn't keep listening past that half sentence when he said that this was a president, Donald Trump became president. And then he went on to be quite critical, actually, both on his on New Day and then again in his essay this morning. Now, don't you think people have been taking things like that and Brian Williams out of context?
Yeah.
Sorry, Jeremy.
Brian, let me just say this.
Even,
I mean,
frankly,
Fareed
Brian,
also was a major cheerleader
Jeremy,
for the Iraq War.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
Well, here's the broader.
Let's not bundle all these things together.
I meant that words matter.
All right, I'll be quiet. Lara, go ahead.
But Jeremy, just not to bundle these things. I agree with a lot of what Jeremy said, and there's been a bizarre mix of either, again, ignoring Syria or fetishizing it. And that's happened with every major image that captured national attention and basically lent itself to wall-to-wall coverage. This time, part of that was U.S. military handout video. The fact that the focus of that video was on somehow glamorizing the strike and not talking about what it achieved or didn't achieve or what it means for Syria, what they did or didn't hit. A lot of the debate over the past 6 years has been whether the U.S. would do a pinpoint strike that took out runways. That didn't happen. So if the runways can still be used, then how is this a deterrent or a disabling of future chemical strikes? So, I mean, there are questions that needed to be asked that haven't been asked.
Let me piggyback on that point about
strike
the
itself.
handout footage. I think that's a really interesting thing. You know, there were images the Pentagon released right away because it was in the government's interest for people to see these airstrikes, these missiles taking off. We do not see as much imagery of attacks in Mosul, for example, of U.S. action in Yemen. There have been civilian casualties in these cases in recent months, as Jeremy was describing. There are not primetime special reports when these U.S. actions happen. And there is something I think that's important to analyze there. I want to go to your point, Jeremy, about military analysts, though. You're saying they should not be on the airwaves at all. I think that's a pretty extreme view, that we should not hear at all from military experts when there's military action happening.
All right, how about this, Brian? When you have these retired generals and colonels on, let's hear what defense companies they're on the boards of. Let's hear how they had their own private companies that benefited off of the Iraq War, like Spider Marks.
I think CNN's quite careful about those disclosures, but I agree it's
it.
important to have those disclosures.
Well, I mean, look, the fact is that when you talk about famous generals, and this is a different network, but Barry McCaffrey, you have your own Spider Marks. I think that the American people deserve to know what was the private sector record of these individuals when it came to the weapons industry or profiting in the private sector off of the proliferation of U.S. wars that happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and elsewhere. There is not the kind of transparency that is required of a truly democratic press when you're not revealing the extent to which these people have benefited in the private sector from these wars.
I appreciate the skepticism.
But Brian, can we get back
into cynicism?
Brian,
Sorry,
can we
Lara,
get back to Syria? Yeah, I was going to say, just getting back to Syria for a second. The majority of this war, and the majority of what I see as the press failure on this war, happened under the Obama years. And we have to acknowledge that. A lot has been going wrong for a long time. Strikes that have gone uncovered in Yemen, in Pakistan, and other places. But just to bring it back to Syria, I mean, part of our error on coverage of Syria across the board has been an area of distortion. We take single incidents and present them without context, without a sense of proportionality, without any sense of where they fit into the direction of this country. Syria has been a critically important war for a very long time. We only came around to it on the later side. And I think that's really important. We need to hold ourselves accountable for that. You've got Arwa Jamin, you've got Claire Saward, fantastic CNN reporters covering this story. And it just hasn't been on the news agenda as high and from an editorial decision-making standpoint. And that's a failure that we all have to look back on and wonder why.
Lara, Jeremy, thank you both very much.
Sorry,
Jeremy, go ahead. Last word.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, Bashar Assad was a brutal thug when he was torturing prisoners on behalf of the CIA. Saddam Hussein was America's friend when he was using chemical weapons. We need to have more than just the immediate crisis memory. We need to understand the historical context of how a butcher like Assad actually has more in common with someone like Dick Cheney than he does with the average Syrian or the people that are on these airwaves as brave reporters.
Historical context, so we can all agree on wanting more of that. Lara, Jeremy, thank you very much. As I mentioned, my essay about talking heads as drummers, beating the drums of war, coming up later this hour. But up next, the biggest ad boycott we've seen in years. Sponsors fleeing Bill O'Reilly's show because of the harassment claims against him. How the impact may be spreading beyond just the O'Reilly factor. Plus, attorney Lisa Bloom, who's representing one of O'Reilly's accusers, here with new developments. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Reliable Sources. I'm Brian Stelter. New details continuing to emerge in the Bill O'Reilly and Fox News sexual harassment scandal. Last summer's Gretchen Carlson lawsuit against Fox News boss Roger Ailes was really the start of a domino effect that we're still seeing, leading first to Ailes' ouster and now the revelations about O'Reilly's settlement payments. Look at what's happened just in the past week. Dr. Wendy Walsh, a former Fox News guest, went public with her harassment allegations against O'Reilly. Fox News contributor Julie Roginski filed a sexual harassment suit against Ailes and also named the channel's current co-president Bill Shine, saying that Shine retaliated against her. Meanwhile, advertisers are abandoning the network's marquee program, The O'Reilly Factor. By the end of the week, O'Reilly's no-spin zone was almost a no-ad zone. These are all advertisers that removed their ads, so they didn't want to be a part of the program. And now there are concerns the ad boycott could spread beyond The O'Reilly Factor. Two reporters on this beat will join me momentarily. But first, Lisa Bloom is here, the attorney representing Dr. Walsh. We mentioned her just a moment ago. She was the former guest on O'Reilly's show who alleges O'Reilly rescinded his offer to make her a contributor after she refused to go to his hotel room back in 2013. Lisa, thanks for being here.
Good morning.
First, your reaction to this ad boycott. A week ago when you and I talked, there was no sense that advertisers might speak up like this.
Listen, Wendy and I are profoundly grateful to every advertiser who has pulled out. Sometimes when I represent women in sexual harassment cases, we feel like we're all alone, that nobody is there with us. I really want to thank Mercedes-Benz, which was the first one to pull out. And when they pulled out, they made a statement about supporting women's equality. We really appreciate that support.
This week, you had a press conference with your client. Then you all, in the middle of the week, you called Fox's corporate hotline. This is a hotline to report harassment claims and other inappropriate behavior. Let's take a look at the video here of that call first.
Your call will be answered by the next available communications specialist.
The primary reason for your report?
Sexual harassment as a job applicant at Fox News Channel by an employee named Mr. Bill O'Reilly.
Okay, and I'm sorry, can I just put you on a brief hold for 1 moment, please?
Maybe this is the point at which people give up.
We're 6.5 minutes into it.
How do you spell his last name?
Capital O, apostrophe.
So, Lisa, you all put out this video. It almost looks like a prank. I mean, you're trying to trivialize this serious issue?
No, if you watch the whole video, there's absolutely nothing prankish about it.
Well,
we were astounded that we had to wait.
Things like that.
Pardon me?
Yeah, having the fast forwarding and things like that.
Well, I don't think you want to sit there and watch us be on hold for 6 minutes, and then as soon as she says his name, we're on hold again. So we fast forwarded through the long hold periods, but if you watch the whole thing, you'll see that this was very serious. Listen, Fox News has said nobody has ever called the hotline. I don't believe that to begin with, but we decided to take them up on it and make a very serious complaint of sexual harassment and retaliation against Mr. O'Reilly.
The former Fox News staffer, including our own Allison Camerata, now here at CNN, has said when she worked there, she didn't know about this hotline. We've heard that from other former Fox staffers. So what happened when you all called? What has happened since that call on Wednesday?
On Friday, we received a return phone call from a couple of attorneys who represent Fox News, and they said that they are indeed going to do an investigation based on Wendy's complaint. I told them we really appreciate that, and let's get going as soon as possible. And so I am told that they are taking it seriously, and they are going to do the investigation that's legally required of them.
Okay, so that sounds like news that you did hear back. And what about the past week for you? Have you heard from any other women who are seeking to be represented by you in this matter?
I've heard from a lot of women. The phone line at the Bloom firm has been flooded with calls. We've talked to a lot of them. Some of them, their claims are time barred. Many of them, probably all of them, are really scared. That's typical. I do sexual harassment cases every day. Women are always scared. But we stand with women, and so we are reviewing a number of other cases, yes.
I think one notable thing about this week is that no other women have publicly come forward to accuse O'Reilly of improper behavior. If you're working at Fox News, you might say this is blowing over. This is going to be history.
Oh, this is not blowing over. I think there are going to be more claims. Listen, think about coming out publicly against Bill O'Reilly, who's extremely wealthy, who has a huge megaphone to come after you. What's the first thing that happened to my client, Wendy Walsh? She got a nasty letter from his attorney accusing her of defamation, threatening to sue her. Nobody should do it alone. They should certainly get an attorney to stand with them. But, you know, people are scared. They don't want this in their lives. What women want are their careers. And as far as I can tell, all of the women who have made complaints against Bill O'Reilly have been driven out. That's the really scary thing for them.
Lisa, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Joining me now here in New York, Emily Steele, reporter with the New York Times, who broke the news about these secret settlement payments in last Sunday's paper. Also here, David Folkenflik, media correspondent for NPR, and the author of Murdoch's World, The Last of the Old Media Empires. David, you reported on Friday that women inside Fox News have some conflicted emotions about this topic, some concern that O'Reilly remains in his job. Tell us about that reporting and how widespread that view is.
Well, I got to say, among some women, among some men as well, there's not particularly conflicted feelings about this. There's a degree of contempt towards O'Reilly. The fact he's been able to continue on. Fox and the Murdoch family made a big show of saying, you know, the culture is changing. We've gotten rid of Roger Ailes after Gretchen Carlson's lawsuit last summer. You know, we're changing the way the place is run. And yet the nation, as you put it, I think quite compellingly, the marquee show on Fox News in primetime every night, Bill O'Reilly, a man who's been accused multiple times serially of sexually harassing colleagues, is there in place. 21st Century Fox, the parent company, the Murdoch family, says, we've talked to Bill O'Reilly. He's assured us he's committed to having a good workplace for folks. But folks at the network are some of them feel some contempt for O'Reilly and how he's behaved, and also skepticism that among some veers towards cynicism toward how the Murdoch family, which controls 21st Century Fox, has addressed this.
So talking about the Murdochs, Emily, is the strategy just silence? We haven't really heard much from the company this week.
That's what we've seen publicly so far. We haven't heard anything more from Bill O'Reilly except the statement that he put out last week. We haven't heard anything more from the parent company either.
And to be clear, O'Reilly said last week these claims are meritless, and the company said, we've talked to O'Reilly about this. The company suggesting they've moved on. But what are you hearing from inside Fox?
That's really a big question that we are continuing to ask and continuing to pursue. One thing that is in the same vein as what David has reported is that women inside Fox are upset about this. People just want to do their job. That's why they're there, and they feel like there's kind of this aura of suspicion around them. At least some of the women that I've talked to, that either they are complicit in this behavior or that they're suffering in silence. And it's very interesting because it's 9 months since Ailes was ousted from the network, and these questions continue to linger.
Now, we look at the ratings for Riley's show. They were either flat or slightly up in the past week. No damage, it seems, among his viewership.
Right, and he has a very loyal audience, a very loyal fan base, and we actually sent a reporter out to watch the O'Reilly Factor with some O'Reilly Factor viewers, and our reporter watched the show with a woman who is a big fan of that show, and she said that she was conflicted about watching it, but she's still loyal to him and to his show.
So if he doesn't have top advertisers, David, but he does have his audience, does that mean he's invincible?
I think he's damaged, but he's not necessarily mortally wounded. It really depends on whether or not there's sustained public outrage, whether the advertising pullback occurs not only against his show, but Fox has been able to place almost all those advertisers on other shows and sort of do make goods, whether or not that spreads to other shows as well. The majority
the company says, to be clear, no financial impact from this ad boycott.
Well, and that's the real question. If a BMW, if a Mercedes says, we're not going to advertise on Fox News writ large, that becomes a much bigger issue if there's a pullback from the network.
Or beyond Fox News, the Fox Broadcast Network. And to be clear, we haven't seen that happening, but I wonder if it could spread that far.
I don't think that's the way it works. I think that you'd have to see an almost a wildfire throughout the country over this issue for that to occur. I do think that, Rupert Murdoch is overseeing the network right now, and he sees himself as a guy who sort of defies public backlash, that he says nobody's going to tell me to do what I do when I do it, up until the moment he absolutely has to. I think you saw that with Roger Ailes, and they cut him off to try to cauterize the wound, and it turns out the culture, at least as these allegations that we've seen suggest, may be deeper than that. And so women at the network say, are we somehow tainted in our professions if we've behaved perfectly appropriately because somehow people think that we've given in to certain kinds of harassment like this? Other women there say, the top stars can't have this, and yet there is, at its core, among particularly the leadership at Fox, a desire to say people aren't going to force us to do things differently than we want to do them. And I think you see that with Bill Shine and Diane Brandy and others.
Right. Fox does not react to public pressure or to peer pressure the way other companies do. Emily,
one interesting point, though, is sexual harassment is against the law. You are not supposed to treat women like this in the workforce. And whether these are allegations, whether they are believed or not, this is an important issue, and women deserve to be treated with respect in the workplace.
And additionally, there's right now a federal investigation going on, I believe you mentioned it earlier, into whether or not payments to some of these women's settlements to keep their allegations private and away from public eye were somehow masked to keep them also away from the company's shareholders and investors, which could itself be a violation of federal law. Right now that's going on in the prosecutor's office. They're handling that investigation here in the Southern District of New York. That could have implications as well. So, I think you're hearing silence from 21st Century Fox because they want this to blow over and they want to see how this plays out. There's sort of a several-track story that they're trying to monitor here.
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows how this actually ends. David, Emily, thanks very much.
You bet.
After a break, more on this. Two top media analysts standing by talking through this. And a quick reminder, in our nightly newsletter, daily coverage of this topic and so much more. Sign up now at reliablesources.com. We'll be right back with more on the O'Reilly matter right after. Welcome back to Reliable Sources. The question everybody in the media business wants to know the answer to: will Fox News continue to stand by Bill O'Reilly? Now, the ad boycott may make him weak, but O'Reilly's ratings remain strong. He remains the king of cable news, as his ads say, and his new book called Old School is #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list. So is he invincible? What's going to happen as a result of these harassment stories? Let me bring in two media critics, including one who used to work at Fox, Jane Hall, professor of media at American University. She was formerly a Fox News contributor, and David Zurwick, media critic with the Baltimore Sun. Great to see you both. Jane, I want to hear first from you on your view of what's transpired the past week. We've not seen an ad boycott this severe against really any media figure in 4 or 5 years. Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck have been targeted in the past, but this has been especially severe, especially quick. O'Reilly started his week with like 30-plus commercials, ended the week with barely 10 commercials. So what's your reaction?
Well, I think that this says we may have reached a cultural moment. Television is very symbolically important, and I think we may have reached a moment where companies felt genuinely that they needed to make a statement that these allegations and the New York Times story meant that they did not want to be associated with this program. I think it's a very important cultural moment. I think it presents Fox with a very interesting challenge as to what they do, but I think the boycott means, and the fact that, as far as I can tell, this was companies moving first. This was not people going to them and saying, you should not advertise. This was companies in their statements saying, we do not want to be associated with the behavior that is alleged and the settlements that are alleged. So I think that's a very important point for the way sexual harassment is viewed in this culture.
David, here's how you frame the O'Reilly scandal in your latest piece. I wanted to pull this part out from your column for Baltimore Sun. You wrote, when I come across O'Reilly on screen, the only thing that comes to mind is the sick, sexist, and predatory culture that is eating like a cancer, like a cancer at Fox News. You say it's a cancer. Tell me why.
I think, Brian, because it's spreading. It continues to grow. Back in August when they fired, I'm sorry, Roger Ailes says he left. I don't know, I don't know. I don't want to hear from his
Under pressure, yes.
Yeah, thank you. When Roger Ailes left Fox News, and everything that's happened since from him, we were shocked that he would leave. And people thought, wow, that's a really dramatic move. They cut off the head of the snake. But it didn't end there. They then lost Megyn Kelly, which I think has been greatly underestimated. Fox has done a good job of saying, oh, she doesn't matter, we just plugged Tucker Carlson in. No, she was the one hope they had of journalistic respectability. She was the one person who covered Trump honorably during the election. She's gone. And now, this is surprising, Brian. You just cited the column I have in the Sun today. I was surprised, that went online Friday, I was surprised by how many women who work at Fox, still work at Fox, some former women, privately contacted me to say, Zurwick, it is a sick culture, you're absolutely right, and just what Lisa Bloom told you, they're frightened, they don't want to work there, so you get to a point at Fox where any woman who has other options, why would she want to work in that? That's a culture that Roger Ailes instituted, what, 20 years ago? And he's such an autocratic personality. Do you know how deeply rooted that is? So here's the dilemma for the Murdochs running it.
All right, well, Jane, sorry to interrupt, but Jane, you worked there in the 2000s. What do you say? Is it a cancer?
I love David Zurwick, but I don't like the metaphor of a cancer. Let me tell you what I think they should do, because I don't want to not say what I think. I think that the 21st Century Fox, clearly, as David Zurwick said, as Emily Steele said, I mean, the New York Times pointed out that having said they would no longer tolerate this kind of atmosphere in the workplace, they were fixing it. They did not fix it. They privately made settlements totaling multi-millions on behalf of Bill O'Reilly. Women are silenced by these settlements. That's one of the problems of these settlements. That's why Wendy Walsh, who's not suing him, could speak freely. I know that they still deny, and Roger still denies, and O'Reilly denies that this happened, but they settled after they said they were cleaning house. So, here's what I think they should do. 21st Century Fox should enforce the law. It is against the law. And they should enforce a change in the culture, because it is true. I have talked to women who worked at Fox who have said just what you all have said. Gee, does it taint us that we look as if we shouldn't be working there? I don't think that's really the point. The point is 21st Century Fox should do what they said they were going to do 9 months ago and change the culture. And if O'Reilly's audience views this as some kind of liberal cabal, then, that is regrettable, but that is not the point. This is against the law. This is corporations supposedly needing to enforce a workplace that is not sexually harassing women. And the perception of that is really damaging. It may not damage their bottom line unless there's a boycott, but that's not really the point here. The point is what kind of culture do they have and how are they going to fix it?
David, I've got 30 seconds left. What's your prediction about what ends up happening here?
Short term, Brian, I don't think anything happens with O'Reilly. He's the franchise. He's the tentpole for primetime. But it's a rock and a hard place, because if they don't go in and tear up that culture, and if they don't take some action against somebody by O'Reilly, this thing will continue to fester. I have to say, though, Jane is right about advertisers coming forward on their own in this case. It's going to take a big, big wildfire for this advertising boycott to affect them. But they have to do something. And the danger right now, Bill O'Reilly has become the face of that sick and predatory culture and everything people have heard since Roger Ailes left the network. That's a difference in the perception of him, even by me as a critic.
And O'Reilly says he's a target for this. He's vulnerable. His claims are meritless. That's what we've heard from him. Nothing else from him this week. Jane, David, thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, two bold, brash New Yorkers, two TV stars who know how to entertain and know how to shock. Bill O'Reilly and Donald Trump, kindred spirits. We'll take a closer look with the one, the only Michael Wolff right after this. With criticism of Bill O'Reilly piling up, there is at least one very powerful person standing by him, his friend, the president, Donald Trump. SNL made Trump's support for O'Reilly a key part of last night's program. Take a look.
One man was brave enough, one man, to come to my defense, a man who was unimpeachable on all female issues, and now he's here tonight. People, please welcome the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
Hello, hi. Hello, everyone. Good evening, Bill. It's so wonderful to be here on The Factor. I'm a big fan.
I'm a big fan as well, and it's an honor to have you here. And can I just say, Mr. President, you look even better on TV.
I know, I do. I look fantastic. And can I tell you something? I actually see a lot of myself in you, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for coming to my defense last week, even though no one asked you to. And you even went as far as saying, quote, Bill O'Reilly did nothing wrong.
That's correct.
And that's based upon...
hunch, just a loose hunch.
All right, Alec Baldwin, they're playing both parts, one pre-taped, one live. And SNL was quoting Trump almost verbatim from this New York Times interview. Trump said O'Reilly is a good person and said he didn't think Bill did anything wrong. Also said O'Reilly shouldn't have settled those complaints. Now, it's one thing for the president to support O'Reilly, but what about the people that ultimately make the call at Fox News, the Murdochs who control 21st Century Fox? Joining me now to discuss that, Michael Wolff, columnist for The Hollywood Reporter and author of The Man Who Owns the News, Inside the Secret World of Rupert Murdoch. Michael, good to see you.
Hey, nice to be here.
You wrote in your book, your biography of Murdoch, that actually he's not a big fan of Bill O'Reilly. Actually, you said doesn't like him at all.
Yeah, let me address this other before we even go there, because I think that the Times interview
right.
and this is interesting, because I noticed that that the Times just the other day in a news story talks about the linking Trump and O'Reilly and calls them both indications of a bygone era. This is a news story, by the way, and I thought
that's biased.
And well, I think it's kind of incredible. I mean, we have a man who was elected the president of the United States, and we have Bill O'Reilly, the most popular anchor in cable TV. Also, by the way, curiously, the best-selling author in the country.
That's true. Yeah.
And so they are the bygone era. I think that they are probably only the bygone era to the New York Times and to other people who hate Fox and hate Trump. And that is where this kind of cleaves, that this is an issue as much about politics as it is about sexual harassment. Now, I'll bring that back to the Murdochs, too, because within the Murdoch empire, that's also where it cleaves.
How so?
You know, you have a generational thing with Murdoch, who may, I think it's immaterial whether he's been a fan of Bill O'Reilly's or not. Bill O'Reilly supports his company.
Right. In a big way.
So he very, very, very much wants to keep Bill O'Reilly. It's his sons who are deeply ambivalent about O'Reilly, about Fox, about Ailes, about Roger Ailes, who was ousted this summer. As a matter of fact, there's an interesting thing that I've been just making calls this week on this, and during the Ailes, when the Ailes issue first came up in July, Murdoch Sr. said to his sons, you know, if we settle this without a fight, we're just going to invite more and more lawsuits. And
which has happened. There have
yes,
been more and more lawsuits.
Yes, and that's, you know, again, back to the New York Times, which did that story about all of the lawsuits and clearly implied that they accepted these lawsuits. They accepted the allegations in these lawsuits. When, you know, trying to walk up the middle of the road, I mean, clearly what you have in any situation like this where you have easy money settlements, you're going to get more lawsuits. In any situation where you have lawsuits, and the New York Times basically was looking at these lawsuits as journalism, that these lawsuits were actual descriptions of what had happened. When everyone knows any lawsuit, any claim is what, 50% accurate, 20% accurate. I mean, it is a lawsuit. So again, we're in this world in which we are just taking sides and effectively taking political sides.
You think the New York Times took sides with the story by taking it so seriously with these women charged?
Yeah, I mean, they just absolutely down the line accepted the fact that these lawsuits represented reality.
You've been around for a while, though. You know that O'Reilly has a reputation.
Well, I think one of the things, the implicit in this story is not what he did, because we don't know what he did, but what we believe he might have done, or what we believe he could do.
Are you worried about sounding like an O'Reilly apologist?
Those are. No, I don't worry about anything. I mean, I worry only about trying to figure out actually what's going on here. And what I do worry about is that more and more on issues involving politics, the media is an unreliable narrator. I mean, the other side may be an unreliable narrator too. Trump is as unreliable a narrator as the New York Times is an unreliable narrator now, and that's where we find ourselves.
Now, some folks are going to say that's a false equivalence, so we'll talk about that next time. Great to see you, Michael. Thank you for being here. After a quick break, my thoughts on the coverage of the Syria strike, how it was portrayed on television online. We'll be right back. What single word dominated the commentary about President Trump's strike in Syria? The one word I heard the most was decisive. In times like these, I find myself thinking about another set of decision makers, the media leaders and producers who decide what gets heard. Because there are hawks and there are doves. And on TV and online, we need to hear from both. Actually, from all of them, because there are really a lot more than two sides here. There are proponents of military force, there are reluctant supporters, there are serious skeptics, there are absolute opponents. And Syria has sort of flipped the Trump media landscape on its head. Lots of Trump skeptics were supportive of the strikes. DC establishment types cheered him on. But
then there are the diehard Trump supporters who have turned into diehard Trump opponents, at least on this issue. Some of them may be frustrated because they were told during the campaign that Syria was not our fight.
Indeed, politics are so scrambled these days. Some of Trump's most loyal fans joined with leftists in opposing the military action. Pro-Trump host Eric Bolling tried to thread the needle this way.
I disagree with the attack on Syria, but is definitive, decisive, and got the American people behind him with that launch. So I actually applaud what he did there, even though I disagree with the tactic.
Political scientists have been studying this rally around the flag effect for decades. Journalists and opinionists are not immune from it. The media loved Trump's show of military might. That's what Washington Post columnist Margaret Sullivan wrote this weekend. She asked, are we really doing this again? That is an unmistakable reference to Iraq. History shows us that too often, skeptical voices are marginalized, drowned out by the beating of war drums. You know, in the days since the strike in Syria, I've seen some strong reporting and some serious skepticism on TV. but it's something that all of us as media consumers should keep a close eye on. I think we need to hear from military experts on this network, but also from anti-war voices or real skeptics. If you're not hearing your view expressed by someone on here and online, that's a problem. We're out of time here on TV, but we'll see you online, reliablesources.com. State of the Union starts right after this break.